Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I suppose I stand here today to represent all the women all over Ireland who regret their abortions. You know, I was reading a book recently called Giving Sorrow Words. It was a book about women who had abortions, who regretted them. And the first line in the introduction to the book was, "This is a book about women who don't exist." Does the silence of post-abortion women mean that we're happy with our abortions? No. The silence of women and men who regret their abortions is a form of self-defense. Abortion truths remain locked away in the deepest recesses of a woman's heart, surrounded by many other lies to maintain the big secret. There's also another constraint to women's grief. The politics surrounding abortion have drowned out the voices of women and men who suffer after losing their children to abortion. Why? Because the charged nature of the subject and the pressure to maintain family secrets. Women don't talk about their abortions as readily as they talk about other pregnancies. It simply doesn't lend itself to casual conversation. It's a very big secret. I know, because I carried that secret for so many years. I hear it on a regular basis from medical personnel who say that women who regret their abortions and who say they suffer from depression must have had some pre-existing mental health conditions. Emotional trauma after abortion is treated with disdain and dismissed by abortion advocates as an invention. I was going to share with you there what an eminent psychologist in America, I hope I'll have time, a psychiatrist and obstetrician from the United States, and also a long-term advocate of abortion, had this to say, and I quote, "Every woman, whatever her age or background, has a trauma at destroying a pregnancy. A level of humanness is touched. This is part of her own life. When she destroys a pregnancy, she is destroying herself. There is no way it can be innocuous. One is dealing with the life force. It is totally beside the point whether or not you think a life is there. You cannot deny that something is being created and that this creation is physically happening. Often the trauma may sink into the unconscious and never surface in the woman's lifetime. But it is not as harmless and casual an event as the pro-abortion crowd insist. A psychological price is paid. It may be alienation, it may be a pulling away from human warmth, perhaps a hardening of the maternal instinct. Something happens on the deeper level of a woman's consciousness when she destroys a pregnancy. He said, "I know that as a psychiatrist," unquote. You hear a lot today about the journey that women have to travel to access abortion. Well, I didn't have to travel. I was actually living and working in England at the time. And you know, I've openly shared my story of regret all over the world. Each time is as difficult as that very first time. To be silent no more at a public level is a difficult calling, I have to tell you. Each time I relive the horror of choosing to end the life of my first child. I grieve again for this child that I will never hold this side of heaven. Truly, by exercising my right to choose, my baby's heart was stopped and my heart was broken. I denied my child of life, and the realization that my aborted child represented a branch of my family tree, not just my child's life, but the possibility of generations to come, had ended. All my child's life experiences were taken away because of a choice, my choice. Today, the famous buzzword is freedom of choice. Well, I have to tell you, it's not freedom. It's a prison for regret, self-hate, grief, and shame. My abortion was supposed to be a quick fix for my situation. Nobody told me there's no quick fix for regret. Something non-human doesn't become human by getting older and bigger. Whatever is human from the beginning. My baby had his own DNA, own functioning heart, separate from mine. You know, it's easier to have an abortion if you can convince yourself that there's nothing there. And those who are pro-abortion are often hesitant to recognize the reality of post-abortion grief because they fear they might have to acknowledge the death of a baby, which might somehow undermine the political argument for abortion. My abortion was done in a hospital in London. I remember The doctor asking me how I felt about being pregnant. I said, I don't want to be pregnant. I'll kill myself. The doctor told me he could do a termination. The word abortion was never used. He said, there's nothing there, just some cells. And he said, you will be just fine afterwards. There was no mention of any risks to their mental or physical health. The word baby, as I said, wasn't mentioned. And I didn't allow myself to think baby at that time. I had just tunnel vision. It was a big problem for me, and it would soon be all over, and nobody would ever know. My family back in Ireland would never find out. And I was raised to respect doctors, and I felt that he knew best. And I was assured that all would be well, which fed into my denial at that time. I suppose the reason given for my abortion was I was suicidal, I would imagine. I wished that I'd had someone to stand with me or sit with me at that time, to talk to me about an alternative to abortion, but there was nobody, and there was no other alternative information given to me at that time. After the abortion, of course, I felt relief, but that was short-lived. The pregnancy was gone, but I felt so empty, like there was something missing. I had nightmares about my aborted child, felt like I had a big A on my forehead. I thought everyone could see through me. I had severe depression and anxiety, panic attacks, especially on the anniversary of the abortion. Especially around Christmas time when I had the abortion, I would always get very depressed around Christmas time. I remember one day going into a toy shop and buying a little doll that cried. And I carried this around in my handbag for a long time. It's like I needed to hear that little baby cry to remind me of what I had done. I had no self-esteem. I felt so bad about myself that I felt I had to apologize to the ground for walking on it. And every challenging event that happened in my life after that, I believe I deserved it. You see, with abortion, there's no body to bury. There's no gravesite to visit. There's no funeral. No flowers and sympathy cards. No family and friends to help you grieve your loss. Later on, I met the man I was going to marry, and I didn't want to bring this secret into my marriage because I felt it wouldn't be right for me to do that to him. So I told him about my abortion, and he was very good, and he encouraged me to move on and to put it in the past. But of course, that's what you have to do to cope. You have to go into denial so that you can move on in your life. Pregnant with our first child, when someone asked me, is this your first child? And I'd whisper yes, but in my heart I would scream no. Many years later, we both moved back to Ireland, and I began to get involved in my parish, going in and out of denial, coping as best I could. And I thought, perhaps if I start doing some good stuff, maybe it'll make me feel a little better about myself. And as I said, I became very, very involved in parish work with this lovely little religious sister. And at the end of a weekend, we just worked together on a program in the parish. She was always applauding me, always saying to me how wonderful I was. But I felt such a hypocrite. I thought if she really knew what I had done, she would run me out of the parish. And I had become very close to this sister because I didn't make friends very easily. I kept people at bay, just in case they might find out my big secret. But this night I decided to challenge her friendship. And I closed my eyes and I poured out my heart to her. And I thought, I'm going to open my eyes and she's going to be looking at me in judgment and condemnation. But when I opened my eyes, she was crying. And she said to me, don't waste your suffering. She said, let God use it for good. And that was the beginning. It was the ending of the isolation. It was the beginning of the dismantling of the secret. And I began to speak out in a small way and gradually got the courage to speak out more and more. And then eventually I heard about this wonderful organization called Rachel's Vineyard. And I decided to do some research. And I discovered that it was founded in the United States by Dr. Teresa Burke, a psychotherapist. And when I looked this up, I said, this is what I need. Because prior to doing this, I had been doing some crisis pregnancy intervention, meeting with women in crisis and hoping that they would change their minds and give lives to their baby. And I trained in the United States to do this, but my greatest tool was my own story. And I have an album filled with babies' pictures at home in my house. But at that time, I began to listening to the stories of those women, that many of them had already been to England for abortions. So Rachel's Vineyard was an answer to my prayer, and the first weekend was held in Cork in 2003. And I have facilitated over 180, I have lost count, weekends since that first weekend in 2003. I have been to countries like England, Scotland, Malta, the Faroe Islands, Hungary, Korea, Lebanon, South Africa, Croatia, Slovenia, to name some. And it has been suggested to me on many occasions that my guilt was Catholic. And I say to them, that's very interesting, because I have met women, Catholic, Protestant, atheist, agnostic. The tears of the Catholic, the Protestant, and the atheist, the agnostic, are all the same. It's a universal experience. Of course, we're being told quite a lot that it's a woman's issue. Yet in my experience, I have met so many men who are deeply damaged by abortion. For every abortion, there's a man who's deeply wounded in his heart. I've heard the stories of men who suffer from depression, anxiety, self-hatred, and shame and broken relationships. They suffer deep regret over an abortion that they paid for, an abortion they had no control over, or an abortion that they forced their partner to have. And in 2011, a friend of mine, another post-abortive lady, and I set up a group called Women Hurt. And the purpose of this was to reach out to other women and men who regretted their abortions and to offer them hope and help. We hoped that other groups would support us in this effort. We were horrified when the National Women's Council of Ireland launched an attack on us. In the Sunday Times of June 19, 2011, Susan McKay, the then director of NWCI, described Women Hurt. We had a billboard campaign around the country for 3 weeks. She described Women Hurt's national billboard campaign as harsh and cruel. And on my billboard, I said they told me abortion would take away all my troubles. It just gave me bigger ones. And there were many other quotes underneath our photographs all around the country. So what was harsh and cruel about that, I don't know. But that's what she deemed it, harsh and cruel, making women feel guilty. She contacted the founder of Rachel's Vineyard in the United States and asked her, was she funding our campaign? She was so concerned, where were we getting the money? And Dr. Burke responded that she was not funding us and asked her why she would want to suppress the real experiences of women who regret abortion. It obviously shows that she values abortion more than women. And there are other victims to this great tragedy. The tentacles of abortion reach into many lives and cross all generational lines. It affects everyone involved in that decision. There are the wounded family and friends, grandparents of the aborted children, siblings of the aborted children, and the doctors and nurses. I have had grandparents, siblings, and nurses on my weekend retreats. It is no respecter of professions or persons or whatever. I visited women in psychiatric hospitals. I remember one lady who was admitted in a dreadful state, and she got my number and called me, and I went to visit her. And her psychiatrist said to her, "You're not still worried about that, are you? It was only a clot." Well, that woman had a nervous breakdown over that clot. We women who are regretting our abortions, we're not grieving over cells or products of conception. We're grieving for our lost children. And I have a beautiful letter here that one man that attended my retreat, a man, I have to add, late in his late 70s, and that abortion happened in his 20s. And I've had his permission to read this, and this is what he said. "It is said that it is only necessary that good men remain silent, that evil may flourish. Although I do not claim to be a good man, I must speak now because evil is certainly here and gaining ground. That evil is abortion. I know, being instrumental in having my child aborted, there, even as I write those words, a chill runs through me. I cajoled, pleaded with, insisted on, and financed a woman who loved me to abort our expected baby, travelling over to England to do so. We hear a lot about women hurt by abortion, but I must state that it is people who are hurt by abortion. Yes, I, a man, confess I am deeply hurt and damaged by it, as are countless families, parents, relatives and friends of the unfortunate women. It is high time that we men spoke up and admit that we too can be hurt, yet even devastated by abortion. We cannot wash our hands of a very destructive, moral, mental and physical situation that we shared in, the origin of. No woman gets pregnant alone. Therefore, we cannot shirk the issue. We must share the responsibility and the pain. What may have seemed escape and release from an unwanted pregnancy and associated complications at the time has become the opposite. Doubtful temporary relief has become permanent remorse and regret. Each day, practically, I grieve for my action and unborn child. Around dates that would have been his or her 16th or 21st birthday are particularly upsetting. I deeply and consistently regret the terrible hurt done to the woman in question. I constantly wonder how her life developed afterwards, yet afraid to inquire lest I reopen old wounds and find her greatly hurt and damaged by the abortion, and my rejection and irresponsible, fearful and selfish action. Years later I married another, and we had 3 children that I cherish a lot, and dare I say, they me. Neither they nor my wife know the unhappy secret and racking burden their daddy bears, and his fear that they would ever learn. When people ask us, how many children do you have, we answer 3, but always I whisper sadly to myself, 4. A void remains. My ability to fully give and take and fully appreciate adult relationships is crippled also. I can say with a quiet certainty that if one could only turn back the clock to that terrible time, I would forfeit my own life in exchange that my aborted child could live instead. And he signs it, one of the people hurt by abortion. And you know, as we were driving here today, I noticed all the different posters on the side of the road. On the yes posters, I saw the words women's health, compassion, stop shaming women. Abortion is not health care. It is the ending of the lives of innocent unborn children. There is no compassion for the baby. Shaming women, they don't even know the meaning of the word shame. I felt such shame, as I said, that I felt I had to apologize to the ground for walking on it. And I hear those same stories from hundreds of women who suffered deep, deep, deep damage. Women who can't have babies now, perhaps, because they've aborted the only baby they'll ever conceive. Women who were given the diagnosis that their babies had a fetal abnormality, which is a term I hate also. Women who were raped and had abortions. And all of these women are grieving the loss of their children. You know, Archbishop Fulton Sheen once said, "The refusal to take sides on a great moral issue is itself a decision. It is a silent acquiescence to evil. The tragedy of our time is that those who still believe in honesty lack fire and conviction, while those who believe in dishonesty are full of passionate conviction. We need right now to have that passionate conviction. We need to speak to our neighbours, to our friends, to go out there, and I know you've all been doing tremendous work all over the country, I've seen it. Please get informed so that you can answer those challenging questions they put to you. Be kind and compassionate. We get nowhere with the clenched fist. The call for the repeal of the 8th Amendment is an attempt to play on the sympathy and compassion most people feel in respect of a tragic diagnosis. People are afraid of suffering and often think that termination is the only reasonable thing to do. Losing the 8th Amendment will not only be a tragedy for Ireland, but for the whole world. If Ireland succumbs, there will be knock-on consequences in all remaining pro-life countries. And remember, we have the truth on our side. And another beautiful quote from St. Augustine, he said, "The truth is like a lion, you don't need to defend it. Set it loose and it'll defend itself." Many people are alive today because of the 8th Amendment to our Constitution. And I know that if I had been living in Ireland back then and had that precious time to reflect, it would have made all the difference to my situation, and my child could be alive today. And that's why I'll be voting no on the 25th of this month. Thank you.